Iran has been blamed for stoking Islamist protests outside schools and on the streets of the UK. A new report from the Policy Exchange has warned that British intelligence services about a series of demonstrations condemning instances of blasphemy. The think tank linked these protests, such as the ones outside Batley Grammar School in 2021 and the demonstrations over the Lady of Heaven film in 2022, to the growing influence of the Iranian regime on British Muslims. The Policy Exchange has called on MI5 to reinstate counter-subversion operations to tackle the growing threat from Tehran, accusing the intelligence service of abandoning its core task at a time when Iran is trying to influence political, religious, educational and cultural organisations to its own ends. Well, with the focus on Iran at the moment, it's clear, actually, that the state's influence in this country goes much deeper than many people had realised. We've granted 100 visas to Iranian, religious figures and some clerics. I think about 20 clerics have been granted visas in this country. We've got these radical Islamist clerics at this nerve centre in West London. And then we've got Batley, we've got the grammar school protests, we've got, other school protests, and we've got these, the Our Lady of Heaven, the film protests, and Policy Exchange. It's an interesting report. They're now calling for MI5 and for the Home Office to crack down on...
Why is this... I don't know why this has taken so
Iranian
long.
subversion.
As one Muslim commentator said to us not that long ago, in fact, I've heard it repeatedly, if some people knew what went on in mosques, they would be absolutely terrified. It doesn't get talked about. talkTV showed some footage about sort of 8 months ago, wasn't it, where we looked at some things that have been said. And just more recent, the Batley Grammar School thing was horrendous.
But in plain sight, imams just standing up.
Standing outside schools, calling for this guy to go to jail, calling this guy to lose his job. All of those people should have just been scooped up in a big net and thrown in the slammer, end of. And the one that really got me was the kid in the playground who apparently scuffed a Quran. And the nearest thing I've ever seen to what looked like a Sharia court, we were faced with the obscene setup of, whether it was a village hall, wherever it was, it might have even been in a mosque, where you had a police chief, an imam, a local councillor, a top cop, and the boy's mother giving a press conference, talking about how sorry they were as what had happened. The imam is saying, we won't let this go, and the copper is nodding his head, sage-like, as this is all being said. The mother is appealing for, please forgive my child. Man alive, how did we get here? This is extremely...
In Britain.
I think that some of these... The numbers I'm not bothered about. 100 visas issued in 20 years is nothing in the grand scheme of things. But there's a much more serious problem we have in this country with being able to address radical Islamists. And as you say, if you've got a cleric, whether it's behind closed doors in a mosque, whether it's outside of school, if you are spewing hate, whatever religion you are, you should be arrested. You cannot be protected because you are Muslim. You can't be protected because...
But it's not... The fact that you hold a status within that religion makes you even more dangerous.
Untouchable.
Because, firstly, you're seen as untouchable, and I think authorities, and we know this through grooming gangs, authorities who've gone, well, we better not say anything because we might get accused of racism. Well, kids are getting raped, and you're worried about getting accused of racism. This was very real on an industrial scale. So, a teacher at a school has got no chance, of any kind of justice on this. And now the poor bloke lives in home.
Look at that Batley Grammar demonstration. When was it? 3 years ago, 4 years ago? It said community leaders, the Muslim community have come out to protest. All the locals are going, never seen any of these people before in my life. In other words, they were all shipped in. So Iran does do this. Russia does this. China does this. They destabilise. They work to destabilise the West, particularly Britain. That's what's going on, and the authorities need to crack down.
Yeah, and obviously it is worth bearing in mind, it's not just about hostile states, whoever they are, trying to mess around with our society and stuff. It's much more serious in the case of Iran. They are pulling the strings of pretty much all the major terrorist organisations in the Middle East, and they have managed to form a coalition of terrorist organisations, which hasn't really been seen before. Normally, you've had Al Qaeda over here and ISIS over here, and all these organisations not really being organised. And the terrifying thing about what Iran is doing is locally in the Middle East, it's organising these terror organisations so that they are going from one end of the Middle East to the other, and then they're trying to influence societies, in the West to get some homegrown terrorism. So it's terrifying that they're pulling the strings from these two different angles.
Well, it gets even more terrifying when you realise that it's Russia and China are pulling Iran's string. Russia and China are backing Iran for Iran to do all its mischief in the Middle East and here. It's happening all over the world. This is a problem, and like so many other areas, the authorities ought to crack down, but they won't. Will just be an increasingly soft touch, which is what Britain is these days.